Introduction, Seneca and Philosophy. Stoicism, a philosophy that for many generations reigned as the most potent intellectual and moral force in the Greco-Roman world, possessed a deep and complex lineage long before Seneca ever put pen to paper. Its origins lie with Zeno, a man of Phoenician descent from Cyprus, who, around the turn of the 4th century BC, began delivering lectures in a famous Athenian colonnade, or stoa, a setting that would eventually lend the entire school its name. Over the following centuries, a succession of thinkers refined and expanded upon Zeno's core tenets, occasionally diverging on finer points of logic or cosmology, yet always remaining anchored to a central moral framework. At the heart of Stoic belief was the vision of the world as a singular, vast community where every human being is joined in a universal brotherhood. This world is not a place of chaos, but one governed by a supreme providence, a force that various thinkers described as divine reason, destiny, nature, or the very spirit of the cosmos. For the Stoic, the highest duty of man is to live in perfect alignment with this divine will, which requires two fundamental commitments. First, bringing one's own life into harmony with the laws of nature, and second, accepting every twist of fate with an unshakable, uncomplaining resignation. By living in this manner, and by refusing to grant ultimate value to the fleeting things that fortune can grant or snatch away at a whim, a person could discover a peace that no external force could ever disturb. Ambition, luxury, and the relentless pursuit of wealth were seen not as rewards, but as the primary obstacles to this inner contentment. To live according to nature meant more than just a simple existence, stripped of excess. It meant the deliberate perfection of reason, that divine spark within the human makeup that elevates us above the animal kingdom. This rational element was intended to be a weapon, used to conquer fear, grief, and superstition, and to demonstrate that nothing is inherently good or evil except for the thoughts we choose to harbor about it. The ultimate goal of this disciplined life was virtues, a term poorly served by the English word virtue, representing a supreme ideal of character built upon wisdom, courage, self-control, and justice. A man who achieved this state became truly self-sufficient, a king in his own right, even if he lived his days in the chains of a slave, for his spirit remained entirely beyond the reach of any earthly master or the wounds of fortune. However, early Stoicism often presented a cold and forbidding face to the world, which limited its appeal among the masses. The figure of the Stoic wise man appeared less like a flesh-and-blood human and more like a fictional ideal who had attained perfection in some sudden, inexplicable transformation, leaving little room for the slow and painful process of self-improvement that most people experience. This original creed seemed to demand a total suppression of human emotion, striving for a state of absolute immunity to feeling that could appear both unrealistic and detached from the common human condition. Seneca's enduring contribution to the history of thought was the humanization of this rigid system. While he primarily wrote for a small circle of educated Romans, acting as a kind of spiritual counselor to his friends and family, his letters and essays reveal a philosophy that is deeply attuned to the frailties of human nature. In Seneca's hands, the ideal of absolute emotional immunity is softened. The wise man is now permitted to have friends, to feel the sting of their loss, and to express a grief that is kept within reasonable bounds. He emphasizes the duty to be kind and forgiving, to live for the other person, and to avoid an ostentatious lifestyle that would alienate those who have not yet found their way to moral enlightenment. This version of Stoicism took on a character that was remarkably religious, moving far beyond the hollow formal rituals of the Roman state religion. Seneca wrote of man's kinship with a loving, beneficent God, and described conscience as an indwelling inner light of the spirit. Concepts so resonant with Christian thought that later writers often noted the striking parallels between his words and the verses of the Bible. For Seneca, virtue was not a means to an end, but its own reward, just as vice carried its own inherent punishment. In the modern world, Where philosophy has often moved toward technical language and logical puzzles, Seneca's approach remains a stark contrast. He would have had little patience for verbal hair-splitting, viewing any philosophy that did not aim to make people better as a form of desertion from its true purpose. For him, the end of all philosophical study was the practical, vital work of curing souls and bringing order to the chaotic minds of men. His words were intended to speak to our condition, offering a guide to the contented life that remains relevant across the centuries. Furthermore, Seneca's belief in the fundamental equality and brotherhood of all mankind, regardless of rank or race, was a radical departure for his time. These ideas led directly to improvements in the legal status of slaves and formed the early seeds of natural law. The concept of a justice that transcends national borders and serves as the foundation for international law. In this way, the quiet reflections of a Roman statesman on the nature of virtue and the soul eventually made their own significant, if indirect, contribution to the great revolutions of the French and American people. Seneca and literature, his letters and other writings. In the estimation of Quintilian, Seneca was a man who applied his intellect to nearly every field of study available to a Roman of his station: oratory, poetry, correspondence, and philosophical dialogue. While much of his output has been lost to time, including his forensic and political speeches, a biography of his father, and various scientific treatises, what survives falls into two primary categories. The first consists of his philosophical essays and the 124 letters addressed to Lucilius. The second category comprises his tragedies, which were likely never intended for the public stage, but rather for private recitation among a sophisticated intellectual circle. The letters to Lucilius, known as the Epistulae Morales, represent a landmark in literary history. Through them, Seneca effectively became the progenitor of the essay. As Francis Bacon would later observe, while the term essay is modern, the practice is ancient. Seneca's epistles are essentially dispersed meditations, cast in the form of personal correspondence. Although they may have originated as genuine communication, they were almost certainly intended for publication from the outset. The tone of these letters shifts fluidly from the rhythm of colloquial conversation to the gravity of a formal treatise. Seneca is a generous and eclectic teacher. He frequently draws upon the wisdom of rival schools, notably quoting Epicurus in nearly every one of the first 30 letters. He employs the style of a diatribe, incorporating imaginary objections from his reader to create a sense of urgent personal dialogue. Everyday events, a trip by sea, a visit to a crumbling villa, or the noise of a public bathhouse serve as the scaffolding for profound abstract reflections. Within these pages, he offers sharp critiques of the decadent Roman aristocracy, alongside balanced explorations of ethics, poetry, and style. His style, for Seneca, the manner of expression, was of vital importance, despite his own warnings against prioritizing how one speaks over what one says. He remains a definitive example of a writer for whom form and content were inseparable. Writing in the Silver Age of Latin literature, he moved away from the expansive, rhythmic periods of Cicero, striving instead for a style defined by pointed brevity, original phrasing, and arresting turns of thought. This stylistic shift was born of necessity. As the Roman Republic gave way to a series of suspicious emperors, the range of safe political subject matter contracted, and the practical value of traditional rhetoric declined. The leisured Roman class turned their rhetorical training toward literary brilliance. Public readings became the fashion, and success was measured by a writer's ability to win applause with every individual sentence. Seneca's prose absorbed the techniques of the schools of rhetoric, a fondness for poetic vocabulary, often borrowed from Virgil, and the use of artificial, verse-like structures. His hallmark was epigrammatic brevity, which he skillfully combined with the easy manner of everyday speech. He exploited a wealth of linguistic devices, antithesis, alliteration, paradox, and oxymoron, to ensure his writing sparkled with intelligence. While this pointed style reads more naturally in Latin than in English, it can leave the reader feeling dazzled and fatigued. Critics like Fronto complained that Seneca's sentences often repeated the same thought in different guises, while Macaulay famously remarked that reading Seneca was like dining on nothing but anchovy sauce, a relentless barrage of mottos and proverbs. Quintilian, though he admired Seneca's moral purpose, feared that the attractive faults of his style were a dangerous influence on young students, leading them away from the balanced orthodoxy of the past, his influence and appeal. If scholars were often critical, the early Christians found in Seneca a kindred spirit. His ideas on God, conscience, and the brotherhood of man were so resonant with Christian teaching that he was frequently quoted by figures such as Jerome, Augustine, and Tertullian, the latter of whom called him often one of us. A forged correspondence between Seneca and St. Paul was widely believed to be genuine throughout the Middle Ages, cementing his reputation as a pagan saint. During the medieval period, Seneca was arguably the best-known classical author after Cicero. His work on natural science, the Naturalis Questiones, remained the primary authority in its field until the rediscovery of Aristotle. His influence reached the giants of literature. Dante, Chaucer, and Petrarch were all devoted admirers. With the advent of printing, his works spread rapidly across Europe. Erasmus produced a critical edition of his prose, and Calvin's first published work was a commentary on Seneca's De Clementia. Montaigne was perhaps the most conspicuously indebted to Seneca, frequently dipping his pitcher into the philosopher's works. His own essays were often described as a French Seneca. Seneca's moral counsel was praised by Emerson, Baudelaire, and Queen Elizabeth II, the latter of whom used his wholesome advisings to soothe her temper. Yet, it was Seneca's plays, despite their technical faults, that had the most profound impact on the development of the European tragic stage. The zenith of his influence occurred during the late Elizabethan and early 17th centuries, when his mark could be seen on nearly every major lyric poet, essayist, and dramatist. While his popularity persisted in France among thinkers like Descartes, Rousseau, and Diderot, it eventually waned in England. Today, despite occasional surges of enthusiasm from figures like De Quincey, Seneca has largely passed into the category of the forgotten author. However, his letters remain a vital document for any who seek a practical guide to the contented life. Note on translation and text. The challenge of translating a classical author is a constant source of debate among men of letters. Yet for the discerning reader, the choice often falls between two extremes: the rigid, word-for-word accuracy of a classroom crib, or the loose, creative interpretation of an inspired paraphrase. The true ideal lies somewhere in the middle, a translation that serves as a mirror, capturing both the essential meaning and the unique auditory character of the original text without adding or taking away from the author's intent. Replicating Seneca's specific style, a blend of rhetorical flourish and conversational brevity, presents significant obstacles. While a translator might feel compelled to mirror the metrical patterns of poetry or the sharp compression of Latin prose, the resulting English must remain natural and accessible. Some of Seneca's most compact thoughts simply cannot be rendered with the same economy in English without sacrificing clarity. Ultimately, a literary translation must be readable. To remain vital and clear, classical works often require fresh revisions every 50 years to remove the jars of outdated language and clarify obscure cultural allusions. In this particular selection of the Epistolae Morales, the traditional formal greetings and closings of each letter have been omitted. Where Seneca's own tone becomes informal or argumentative, colloquialisms and modern phrasing have been used to reflect that shift. This version draws upon several established scholarly texts, including the works of Beltrami and the Oxford Classical Text by L.D. Reynolds, while also acknowledging the linguistic contributions of earlier translators like Gamere and Barker. The criteria for selecting which of the 124 letters to include were based primarily on their ability to paint a vivid picture of Seneca's philosophy and the Roman world he inhabited. To avoid the repetitive nature common in moralistic writing, some letters have been shortened, leaving a collection that is essentially a personal anthology intended to provide a practical guide to the contented life. Introduction. Postscript. In reflecting on the nature of presenting such a work to the public, one is reminded of the blunt wisdom found in the 17th century anthology by Sir Roger L'Estrange. He observed that making endless apologies for one's lack of skill in translation is a pedantic folly. If a man truly believes himself inadequate, he should not venture into print at all. An abstract of this kind is a gift to the public, and while it may not always capture the full fire of the original spirit, it remains a valuable offering. Books, much like food, are subject to the individual tastes of the reader. It is impossible, and perhaps even undesirable, for any single work to please every palate, for universal applause is often a sign of mediocrity. These pages were originally compiled for personal benefit and reflection, but they are open to any who wish to share in them. However, the reader should proceed with a certain level of courtesy. It is a poor guest indeed who sits at another man's table only to complain about the meal provided. Letters. Letter 2. On discursiveness in Reading. It is a mark of a stable and well-ordered spirit when a person can remain in one place and find contentment in their own presence, rather than being driven by a restless urge to move from one location to another. This same principle of steadiness must be applied to your intellectual pursuits. Beware of a scattered and aimless approach to reading, where you flutter through a vast number of different books and authors without ever settling on any. To derive lasting benefit and true nourishment for the mind, you should focus your attention on writers of established genius, staying with them long enough to absorb their wisdom fully. A person who is everywhere at once truly belongs nowhere. Just as those who spend their entire lives traveling abroad may find many places to stay but few true friends, the reader who skips from one great mind to another, paying only fleeting visits, fails to develop a meaningful or intimate understanding of any. The mind cannot assimilate knowledge that is taken in and then immediately cast aside, any more than a body can be nourished by food that is not retained. Constant changes in treatment only hinder a cure. A wound cannot heal if it is subjected to a never-ending series of experimental ointments, and a plant that is moved too frequently will never grow strong. Nothing is truly useful if it is only encountered in passing. An excessive number of books can actually become a burden, standing in the way of learning rather than aiding it. If you cannot possibly read every book you own, it is enough to have as many as you can actually manage to study. You might feel an impulse to open different volumes at different times, but remember that a desire to taste every dish is a sign of a disordered appetite. When foods are too diverse and mismatched, they cause harm to the system rather than providing nutrition. Therefore, you should prioritize well-tried authors, and if you ever feel the need for a change, return to those you have already studied. Each day, make it your practice to acquire some piece of wisdom that will help you confront poverty, death, or any other misfortune. Out of the many ideas you encounter, select one specific thought to be thoroughly contemplated and digested throughout the day. This is my own method. From the wide range of my reading, I always seize upon one particular insight to carry with me. Today, for instance, I found a thought in the writings of Epicurus, for I frequently venture into the camp of our rivals, not as a deserter, but as a scout gathering intelligence. He writes that a cheerful state of poverty is an honorable thing. Yet, if poverty is truly cheerful, it is not poverty at all. Real poverty does not consist of having too little, but of constantly craving more. It matters little how much wealth a man has stored in his barns or his safe, how much land he owns, or how much interest he collects, if he is perpetually focused on what belongs to others and counts only what he has yet to gain, rather than what he already possesses. If you ask what the true limit to wealth should be, the answer is simple. First, having what is essential, and second, having what is enough. Letter 3. On true and false friendship. You mentioned in your letter that you sent a message by way of a friend, but in the very next breath, you cautioned me against speaking freely with him about your affairs, noting that you do not even do so yourself. In effect, you have both called him a friend and denied him that title within the same message. If you were using the term friend in a loose, popular sense, the way we might call a political candidate a gentleman, or greet a stranger as "my dear fellow," when their name escapes us, we might let the contradiction pass. However, if you truly consider someone a friend but do not trust them as you trust yourself, you are making a fundamental mistake and have failed to understand the true nature of friendship. While you should certainly discuss everything with a friend, you must first carefully consider the character of the person before you grant them that title. Trust must follow the formation of a friendship, but judgment must precede it. Many people mistakenly judge a person only after they have already made them a friend, which is truly putting the cart before the horse. Take a long time to decide whether someone is worthy of your friendship, but once you have made that decision, welcome them into your life with your whole heart and speak with them as unreservedly as you would with your own soul. Ideally, you should live in such a way that you have no secrets you would fear telling an enemy. Nevertheless, because social conventions often demand discretion, you should at the very least share all your worries and plans with your friend. If you treat a person as loyal, you will often make them so. On the other hand, those who live in constant fear of being deceived often teach others how to deceive them, for their very suspicion gives others a reason to act wrongly. Why should I hold anything back from a friend? When I am in their company, I should feel as though I am alone and free to be myself. There are some who unburden their minds to everyone they meet, sharing secrets that should only be told to a close confidant. Others swing to the opposite extreme, refusing to confide even in their closest friends, keeping their secrets buried deep within themselves. Both behaviors are flawed. Trusting everyone is a mistake, but so is trusting no one, though I would say the first is a more honorable failing and the second a safer one. Similarly, you should avoid both those who are always in a state of restless activity and those who are perpetually at rest. A constant urge to be busy is not true industriousness. It is merely the frantic energy of a troubled mind. Conversely, viewing all activity as a burden is not true repose, but a form of weak inertia. I'm reminded of a saying by Pomponius, "Some men have hidden themselves so far into dark corners that even in bright daylight everything appears blurred to them." What we should strive for is a balance between these two states. The active person should be able to find ease, and the person at rest should be capable of action. Look to nature for guidance. She has given us both day and night. Letter 5. On the philosopher's mean, I am truly heartened by the dedication you show to your studies and the way you prioritize your daily moral advancement above all else. It is a pursuit I not only encourage but earnestly urge you to maintain. However, I must offer a word of caution. Do not fall into the trap of those who seek notoriety rather than genuine self-improvement by adopting an eccentric appearance or lifestyle. You must avoid the temptation of shabby clothes, unkempt hair and beards, or ostentatious displays of asceticism like sleeping on the bare ground or vocalizing a hatred for fine silver. The path of philosophy is already viewed with enough suspicion by the public. We need not invite further hostility by unnecessarily flouting social conventions. Our inward life should be entirely transformed, but our outward appearance should remain in harmony with the world around us. Our garments should be neither extravagant nor intentionally squalid. While we should eschew the luxury of gold-inlaid silver, we must not falsely believe that the mere absence of such treasures is proof of a simple life. Our goal is to live a life that is better than the average person's, but not one that is fundamentally alien to them. If we alienate those we hope to influence, they will refuse to follow our lead in any matter for fear of being forced to adopt our most extreme habits. Philosophy is fundamentally about fellowship and our shared membership in the human community. To make ourselves unnecessarily different is to abandon that core principle. The true standard of nature does not require us to torture ourselves, to be intentionally filthy, or to consume food that is revolting. Just as a craving for delicacies is a sign of excess, an intentional avoidance of common inexpensive food is a sign of an unbalanced mind. Philosophy is a call to simple living, not to a life of penance. Simplicity can and should be practiced without becoming crude. I advocate for a life that is a sensible compromise between philosophical ideals and the practical morality of our society. Our lives should be admirable, yet relatable. If you wonder if this means we will be indistinguishable from the crowd, I assure you there is a profound difference. A close observer will recognize us, not by our furniture, but by our character. A truly great person is one who can use earthenware as if it were silver, and just as importantly, one who can use silver as if it were earthenware. It is a sign of a weak mind to be unable to bear the burden of wealth. To conclude today's thoughts, I offer a piece of wisdom from the Stoic Hecatol. By limiting our desires, we can effectively cure ourselves of fear. He suggests that if we stop hoping for specific outcomes, we will stop fearing their opposites. Though hope and fear seem like opposites, they are actually linked like a prisoner and the guard they are handcuffed to. Both arise from a mind that is suspended in anxiety about the future rather than being grounded in the present. Foresight, which should be one of humanity's greatest blessings, often becomes a curse when we use it to project ourselves into future worries. While animals only react to the dangers they see, humans are uniquely tormented by both the past and the future. We bring past agonies back through memory and experience future ones prematurely through foresight. In truth, no one is ever unhappy solely in the present. Letter 6. On sharing knowledge. I can see a profound transformation occurring within myself. Lucilius. Though I do not yet claim to be perfect or free from all need for change, there are still many areas of my character that need to be strengthened, refined, or removed altogether. In fact, the very realization that I have such failings is a sign of genuine progress. Just as it is a hopeful sign for a sick person to recognize their own illness, I am encouraged by my own awareness. I wish to share this inner change with you, for doing so strengthens the bond of our friendship, that rare, true friendship that is not based on hope, fear, or personal gain, but on a shared commitment to what is honorable. Many people have acquaintances, but few have true friendship, which only exists when two people are united by a common desire for virtue and a willingness to share both successes and setbacks. I am witnessing changes in myself every single day. You might ask me to send you the methods I have found so effective. I am more than happy to share everything with you. Indeed, the primary joy I find in learning is the ability to teach. No knowledge, however profound or helpful, would give me pleasure if I were forced to keep it to myself. If wisdom were offered to me on the condition of secrecy, I would reject it, for there is no real enjoyment in possessing something valuable unless it can be shared. I will send you the books I've been studying and mark the specific passages I find most valuable to save you time. However, remember that personal interaction and daily intimacy are far more beneficial than any book or lecture. I wish you were here with me, not only because we learn more through our eyes than our ears, but because the path of instruction is long while the path of personal example is short and powerful. Cleanthes did not become the image of Zeno merely by listening to him. He lived with him and observed his private life to see if his actions matched his words. Plato, Aristotle, and many others learned more from Socrates' character than from his spoken philosophy. It was living under the same roof as Epicurus that truly transformed his greatest disciples. I invite you here not just for your own progress, but for mine, as we will be of great benefit to one another. In keeping with my daily practice, I will share one last thought from Hecato. What progress have I made? I am beginning to be my own friend. To become one's own friend is significant progress indeed. Such a person will never truly be alone, and you can be certain that someone who is a friend to themselves is a friend to all. Letter 7. On crowds. You ask what you should particularly avoid, and my answer is simple. The crowd. It is nearly impossible to spend time in a large group of people and return home with your character unscathed. The very nature of a crowd is such that it inevitably rubs off some of its vices on you, or at the very least, weakens your resolve. The larger the assembly, the greater the spiritual peril. Nothing is as damaging to a good character as attending a public spectacle, for it is there that pleasure provides a gateway for cruelty and greed to slip into the soul. I often return from such gatherings feeling more self-indulgent, more ambitious, and, paradoxically, more inhumane. Simply because I have been among humans. I happened to visit a midday show at the arena, expecting some light entertainment or wit to provide a respite from the sight of blood. I was deeply mistaken. The preliminary contests were mere mercy compared to what followed. Now all technical skill is cast aside, and the spectacle is nothing but pure slaughter. The fighters have no armor. Their entire bodies are exposed to every blow. Most spectators prefer this to the regular matches, and why wouldn't they? There is no helmet to deflect the sword, no shield to ward off the strike. The only purpose of the contest is to ensure that death is certain and swift. In the morning, men are thrown to the lions and bears. At noon, they are thrown to the audience. The crowd demands that the killer be pushed back into the path of the next slayer, keeping the victor only until he can be killed in turn. The end, for every fighter, is death, and the intervals are filled with fire and the lash. You might argue that these men are criminals, murderers, or thieves. Even if they deserve such punishment, what have you done to deserve the psychic injury of watching it? When you witness such brutality, you are teaching yourself that human life is cheap. Keep your mind away from the influence of the masses. Even great men like Socrates, Cato, or Lucilius might have seen their moral foundation shaken by a crowd that lived so differently from them. How much more vulnerable are we who are still struggling to find our footing in philosophy? A single example of extravagance or greed can do immense damage to a private household. Imagine the effect of an entire nation applauding vice. Withdraw into yourself as much as possible. Associate only with those who will improve you, and welcome those whom you yourself can improve. This process is mutual. Men learn while they teach. Do not seek the applause of the public. Your talents are not meant for them. If a few people understand and appreciate your progress, that is enough. You might ask why I bother to learn if I have no intention of showing it off. I learn for myself and for you. As Democritus once said, one man is to me as a crowd, and a crowd is as one man. Epicurus expressed the same sentiment when he wrote to a fellow student. I am writing this not for the many, but for you. We are a large enough audience for each other. Keep these thoughts close to your heart, Lucilius, and you will find that the hunger for public approval begins to fade. Letter 8. On the philosopher's seclusion, you might wonder if I have abandoned my principles by withdrawing from public life and seeking seclusion. On the contrary, I am working for future generations. I am recording reflections that may serve as wholesome advisings, much like the recipes for effective medicines. I am pointing out the right path to others. A path I discovered late in life, after much wandering and exhaustion. I cry out to the world. Avoid those things that the common people find attractive, those gifts of fortune. Stand back in suspicious awe before every supposed blessing that comes by chance. Wild animals and fish are captured by the lure of a tasty morsel. So too are we trapped by the favors of luck. We think we possess these things, but in reality, they possess us. This frantic race for wealth and status leads only to a precipice. When life begins to tumble, it doesn't just fall, it crashes into ruin. Follow this healthy and beneficial rule of life. Indulge the body only as much as is necessary for good health. It should be treated with some firmness so that it remains obedient to the mind. Eat only to satisfy hunger, drink only to quench thirst, and dress only to keep out the cold. Your house should be a protection against the elements, not an ornament of luxury. It matters little whether your roof is made of thatch or gold. A man can be just as happy under either. The mind should be trained to despise everything that results from purposeless labor or superficial decoration. Remember that nothing is truly admirable except the soul, and for a great soul, nothing external is truly large. If I am to share my daily contribution with you today, I will borrow again from Epicurus. To gain true freedom, you must be the slave of philosophy. The person who submits to philosophy does not have their freedom delayed. They are emancipated on the spot, for the very act of serving philosophy is itself the highest form of liberty. You may ask why I quote Epicurus so often. It is because good ideas are common property. They do not belong to a single sect. Just as in the theatre, we sometimes hear a line of truth spoken by a comic actor that should have been spoken by a philosopher, so too can we find wisdom in the words of those we might otherwise disagree with. Truth belongs to the person who recognizes it. Letter 9. On philosophy and friends. You desire to know whether Epicurus is correct in asserting that the wise man is entirely self-contented and thus has no need for a friend. This is a point of contention between the Epicureans and the followers of Stilbo, who believe the supreme ideal is a mind that does not even feel its own suffering. We must be careful with our language here. While the Greeks speak of apatheia, we might call it a mind that is invulnerable or above all hardship. The true distinction is that while the Epicurean wise man does not feel his troubles, the Stoic wise man feels them but overcomes them. We agree that the wise man is content within himself. He is satisfied with his own company, even if he were to be maimed or lose a limb. He would prefer to be whole, but he can endure being incomplete without losing his happiness. However, being self-content does not mean he desires to be alone. He is able to be without friends in the sense that he can bear their loss with equanimity, knowing he possesses the skill to make new ones. Just as a master sculptor can immediately begin a new statue if one is destroyed, the wise man can fill the void left by a lost friend. If you ask how one makes a friend so quickly, I will share a secret from Hecate. If you wish to be loved, love. There is a profound joy in the act of building a new friendship, just as a farmer finds pleasure in the sowing of seeds, not just the harvest. The wise man seeks friends not for his own advantage, not for someone to sit by his bed when he is ill, or to ransom him from prison, but so that he may have someone for whom he himself can perform those services. Those who enter into friendships for utility create fair-weather bonds. When the usefulness ends, the friendship dissolves. This is why successful men are surrounded by crowds, while the ruined are left in solitude. A true friendship is not a business deal. It is an impulse of the soul. We are born with a natural instinct for society, drawing one human being to another. The wise man, though he can live without friends, chooses not to, for he values the noble stimulation of shared virtue. Remember the words of Stilbo, who, after his city was destroyed and his family lost, told his conqueror, "I have all my valuables with me." He meant his inner character, his justice, and his wisdom. Things that cannot be taken away by fire or sword. Even Epicurus admitted that a man is unhappy, even if he rules the world, if he does not consider himself supremely happy. Contentment is a boundary we draw for ourselves independent of what the public thinks or what fortune bestows. Letter E. On the blush of modesty, I recently spoke with a talented young friend of yours whose character and intelligence were immediately apparent. He spoke with such unrehearsed brilliance that he was eventually overcome by his own embarrassment, and a deep blush suffused his face. This is a marvelous sign in a young man. I suspect this trait will remain with him even after he has perfected his character and become a wise man. No amount of wisdom can entirely erase the physical and mental weaknesses that are woven into our nature. Practice can soften them, but it cannot conquer them. Some of the bravest men break into a sweat before a crowd, or find their knees trembling and their teeth chattering when they are about to speak. These are the marks of nature wielding her power, reminding even the strongest of their humanity. A blush is one of these unbidden responses. It is more common in the young, whose blood is hot, but it affects the aged as well. Some men are even more to be feared when they flush, as if the blood rising to their faces releases their inhibitions. Sulla, for instance, was at his most dangerous when he reddened. Pompey, too, was famously susceptible to blushing in public. This is not a mental failing, but a physical predisposition. Wisdom cannot banish it, for if she could, she would have dominion over nature itself. As a conclusion to this thought, let me offer you a rule to live by. Choose a good man whom you admire, perhaps a Cato or a Laelius, and keep him constantly in your mind. Act as if he is always watching you, and live your life as if your every thought were visible to him. We need a standard against which to measure ourselves. Without a straight ruler, you cannot hope to make the crooked straight. Letter 2. On old age, wherever I turn, I am confronted with evidence of my own aging. I visited my country house recently and grumbled to the manager about the cost of repairs for such a dilapidated building. He replied that he was doing his best, but the house was simply old. It struck me then, this house was built under my own direction. If these stones are crumbling, what does that say about me? I even found myself irritated by the state of the plane trees, which were dry and knotty. The manager insisted he had cared for them, but they too were old. I had planted those trees myself. At the front door, I encountered a decrepit old man and asked who he was. It turned out to be Felicio, the son of my former manager, whom I used to play with as a child. He called himself my playmate, and seeing him missing his teeth, I realized just how far time had marched. Yet we should cherish old age. It is a period full of pleasure if one knows how to use it, just as fruit is sweetest. When it is nearly over and the final glass of wine provides the most potent delight, the time of life that is on the downward slope, but not yet in steep decline, offers its own unique satisfaction. There is a great peace in having outworn one's desires and left them behind. You may argue that it is unpleasant to have death always before one's eyes, but death should be before the eyes of the young just as much as the old. The summons does not follow the order of the register. Every day should be lived as if it were our last, the day that rounds out and completes our existence. The man who can say, "I have lived," with a cheerful heart each night, receives a windfall every morning he wakes. Let us be grateful that no one is truly held prisoner in life. To live under constraint is a misfortune, but as Epicurus said, there is no constraint to live under constraint. The roads to freedom are short and easy to find. Whatever is true belongs to everyone, and I shall continue to share these common truths with you, for the things of greatest merit are the property of all mankind. Letter 15, on brawn and brains. The ancients had a custom, which persisted for many years, of starting a letter with the words, "If you are well, it is good, I am well." For us, a better way to begin would be, "If you are studying philosophy, it is good, for that is the only true health of the spirit. Without it, the mind is sick, and even the body, no matter how much strength it possesses, is merely the strong-framed house of a madman. You should prioritize this health of the soul first, and the health of the body second. I do not mean that you should neglect your physical form entirely, but do not become obsessed with it. It is a foolish endeavor for an educated man to spend his hours straining his biceps and thickening his neck. No matter how much you bulk up or how broad your shoulders become, you will never match the weight of a prize bull or the strength of an elephant. Furthermore, the heavy physical exertion required for such training drains the mental energy needed for higher studies. The sheer volume of food required to sustain a heavyweight physique also dulls the sharpness of the mind. If you must exercise, choose activities that are quick and easy, serving only to tire the body enough to allow for rest without stealing too much time from your real work. Running, jumping, or even a form of shadow boxing can serve this purpose. But whatever you choose, return quickly from the body to the mind. The mind is something you can exercise day and night. It requires very little to stay nourished and grows stronger even as the body ages. I do not even require you to be sitting or standing to study. You can exercise your mind while walking or traveling, but be wary of those who think they must shout and strain their lungs to be heard. A philosopher's voice should be moderate, not a bellow. Just as we train our gait to be neither a crawl nor a run, we should train our voice to be clear and controlled. To end this letter, here is a gift from Epicurus. The life of folly is unpleasant and fearful. It is wholly lived in the anticipation of the future. You might wonder how a fool can be said to live always in the future. It is because a fool never truly settles into the present. He is always about to live, always planning to begin, but never actually doing so. Most people spend their lives preparing for a life they never get around to experiencing. Do not wait for the future to be happy. Make the most of the day that is here. Letter 16. On Philosophy, the Guide of Life. I know well, Lucilius, that you are clear in your mind that no one can live a truly happy life, or even a life that is merely tolerable, without the constant study of wisdom. You understand that while perfect wisdom makes life happy, even the initial pursuit of it makes life bearable. But this understanding must be more than just a thought. It must be solidified through daily practice. You must persist until what is currently a good intention becomes a permanent habit of the soul. You do not need many words from me to prove this. However, you do need the encouragement to keep going. Philosophy is not a parlor trick or a way to show off in front of an audience. It is not about clever words, but about facts and actions. It does not exist to help us pass the time or to provide entertainment for our leisure hours. It molds and builds the soul. It puts our life in order and regulates our actions. It shows us what we should do and what we should avoid. It sits at the helm and directs our course through the shifting currents of existence. Without philosophy, no one can live without fear or anxiety. Countless things happen every hour that require advice, and that advice can only be found in wisdom. Someone might say, what is the point of philosophy if there is such a thing as fate? What use is it if a god rules the universe, or if chance governs all things? Whether we are bound by an inexorable law of destiny, or a divine judge decides our path, or blind luck tosses us about, philosophy must be our shield. It will encourage us to obey God willingly and to defy fortune with courage. It will teach us to follow the path of nature regardless of the outcomes. But I must not lead this letter into a long debate. My goal today is simply to remind you to keep up the momentum of your progress. To help you along, here is a thought for your collection. If you live according to nature, you will never be poor. If you live according to the opinions of others, you will never be rich. Nature's needs are small and easily satisfied. The demands of public opinion are infinite. If you pile wealth upon wealth, if you cover yourself in gold and marble, you will only increase your desire, not satisfy it. Natural desires have a limit, but those born of false opinion have no ending point. A traveler on a path eventually reaches a destination, but a wanderer has no end. Step away from the vanity of the world, and you will find that enough is closer than you think. Letter sortit on festivals and fasting. The month is December, and the entire city of Rome is currently in the grip of a feverish celebration. The Saturnalia is upon us, and the usual restraints of society have been cast aside. Where once this was a focused religious observation, it is now transformed into a season of public indulgence and noise. The streets ring with the sounds of revelry, and everywhere one looks, the heavy preparations for luxury are underway. It seems as though the world has decided that the way to honor the gods is through excess. Indeed, if you were here, we might have debated whether to maintain our usual routine or to join the crowd, if only to avoid appearing singular by wearing the dinner gown instead of the toga. Yet, this is precisely the time to test the strength of the soul. It is a far greater achievement to remain sober and composed when the entire population is intoxicated with pleasure. To remain steadfast in one's principles while others are drifting into self-indulgence is the ultimate proof of character. I do not forbid you from participating in the joy of the season, but I urge you to do so without losing your grip on your inner self. You can be part of the festivities without being part of the mob. In fact, I have a specific exercise for you that is most appropriate for such times. Set aside a few days where you will be content with the meagerest and cheapest of food, and where your dress is rough and coarse. During this time, say to yourself, is this the condition I so greatly feared? It is in times of security that the mind should prepare itself for hardship. Just as a soldier practices maneuvers in times of peace and builds earthworks when no enemy is in sight, we should prepare for the blows of fortune before they strike. If you wish to be unafraid of poverty, you must become intimately acquainted with it. You do not need a great deal of equipment to begin. Even the bed of a beggar and a crust of stale bread will suffice. This is not a mere intellectual exercise. It is a way to prove to yourself that your happiness does not depend on external comforts. Even Epicurus, the supposed teacher of pleasure, practiced such days of fasting and scarcity to see if his contentment was diminished. He found that a few pennies worth of barley porridge and water provided a satisfaction that was not only sufficient, but profound. True wealth is not found in a filled treasury, but in a mind that has learned to need nothing. By voluntarily embracing these periods of rehearsed poverty, you strip fortune of her power over you. When you return to your usual comforts, you will do so with a clearer perspective, knowing that you can survive and even thrive on much less. To conclude, let me share a thought for the day. Unbridled anger leads to madness. We must govern our tempers as strictly as we govern our desires. Anger is a brief insanity that destroys everything in its path. If you cannot control your impulses during a festival, how will you control them during a crisis? Practice moderation now, so that you may be the master of yourself always. Letter Tinsit on old age and death. I was just recently telling you that I'd reached the doorstep of old age. Now I fear I have crossed over the threshold altogether. Time has laid its mark upon me, and I am no longer merely elderly, but truly old. Yet I find that my mind remains remarkably resilient. It does not share the fatigue of the body. It is like an active tenant living in a crumbling house. In fact, it seems to have gained a certain sharpness as the physical senses dim. It is almost as if the spirit, seeing the end of its journey approaching, has decided to settle its accounts and prepare for the final departure. I spend my time reflecting on my past life, putting my thoughts and actions to the test. I ask myself, have I truly lived according to the principles I have so often praised? It is easy to speak bravely about death when it is a distant shadow, but the true test comes when the shadow lengthens and touches you. We spend our lives rehearsing for this final act, but only the act itself reveals whether we were sincere or merely playing a part. Death is the moment when all pretenses are stripped away. It is the one judge that cannot be bribed or deceived. You might think it a grim task to focus so intently on the end of life, but there is a profound liberation in it. To study death is to study freedom. A man who has learned how to die has unlearned how to be a slave. He is beyond the reach of any earthly power, for the ultimate threat of the tyrant is death, and he has already mastered his fear of it. Do not wait until your final hour to begin this contemplation. Every day is a little life, and every night is a little death. If you can greet each morning with gratitude as if it were a bonus you did not expect, you will find that you live with a vitality and a clarity that the fearful can never know. I am not suggesting that you should seek death, but rather that you should cease to fear it. Whether it comes sooner or later is of little importance. What matters is that you meet it with a steady gaze and a quiet heart. To conclude my daily rent to you, here is a thought that I found in the records of another. To meditate on death is to meditate on liberty. This is not a call to morbidity, but a call to the highest form of independence. He who knows how to die knows how to not be forced into anything against his will. He has found the door that leads out of the prison of circumstance. Practice this thought, and you will find that the weights of life grow lighter. Letter 17th, on the shows of Epicurus. You ask me to provide you with more of the maxims I've been sharing from Epicurus and others. I will do so, but I must warn you against relying too heavily on these bite-sized pieces of wisdom. It is a sign of a weak and undeveloped mind to constantly seek out the best bits or to memorize a few clever sayings to impress others in conversation. This is the behavior of a schoolboy, not a man who is serious about his moral development. The goal of philosophy is not to possess a collection of beautiful sentences, but to transform your entire way of being. You should aim to reach a point where you no longer need to quote others because you have become a source of wisdom yourself. A person who only repeats what they have read is like a man who lives on borrowed money. Eventually, the debt comes due, and they are left with nothing. In our school, we do not have a few famous leaders whose words are law. We are not like the Epicureans who follow the dictates of a single master as if they were divine oracles. In the Stoic tradition, every man is free to investigate the truth for himself. We respect our predecessors, of course, but we do not worship them. Truth is open to all. It has not yet been fully discovered, and much of it is left for future generations to find. However, since you have asked, I will not send you away empty-handed. Here is a thought for your reflection. Real wealth consists in wanting nothing. This is a paradox that the world struggles to understand. Most people believe that wealth is the accumulation of things, but true prosperity is the subtraction of desire. If you can reach a state where you are content with what nature provides, you are richer than any king who is perpetually worried about losing his crown or gaining another province. Remember that the mind is the only thing that is truly ours. Everything else, our bodies, our reputations, our possessions, is subject to the whims of fortune. If you anchor your happiness to these external things, you are building your house on sand. But if you find your satisfaction within your own character, you are building on a foundation that no storm can shake. Work toward this inner self-sufficiency, and you will find a peace that the world can neither give nor take away. Letter 29. On travel as a cure for discontent. You write that you have been traveling extensively, moving from one city to another in the hope of escaping the gloom and heaviness that has settled over your spirit. You seem surprised that these journeys have done nothing to alleviate your distress. But why should they? You are traveling with the very person you are trying to flee. You are dragging your own mind along with you, and as long as that mind is troubled, no change of scenery will bring you peace. As Socrates famously said to a man with the same complaint, "Why are you surprised that your travels do you no good when you are traveling in your own company? The same thing that drove you away is still with you." If you are carrying a heavy burden on your back, it does not matter if you walk in a forest, on a beach, or through a crowded city. The weight remains the same. The problem is not the place you are in, but the person you are. You are restless because you are at war with yourself. You are seeking a cure in geography, but the remedy you need is philosophy. Once you have set your mind right, every place will be pleasant. Even if you were exiled to a barren island or a distant frontier, you would find contentment because you would carry your own happiness within you. But until you achieve that inner balance, you will find faults with every location. You will be annoyed by the noise in Rome, the heat in Egypt, and the cold in Gaul. Stop running. The peace you are looking for is not across the sea, it is within your own breast. Instead of changing your climate, change your soul. When you have done that, it will not matter where you are. You will be at home anywhere in the world, because the world itself is the home of the wise man. For today's concluding thought, I offer you this: the knowledge of sin is the beginning of salvation. To change your life, you must first recognize that something is wrong. A person who does not know they are sick will never seek a physician. Acknowledging your own failings is the first step toward overcoming them. Do not be afraid to look clearly at your own character. It is the only way to begin the work of reconstruction. Letter on the futility of learning maxims. You are eager for more of those short, pithy sayings that I have been including at the end of my letters. You seem to want to build a collection of these flowers of wisdom. However, I must tell you that this desire for lists of maxims is a trait of a mind that is still in its infancy. It is the way children learn, by memorizing short verses or a few striking lines. For a man who has made progress in philosophy, such a habit is beneath him. In other schools of thought, like that of Epicurus, the followers rely heavily on the words of their founder. They have a few set formulas that they repeat, and everything is credited to the one master. But in the Stoic school, we are not under a monarchy. Each of us is a discoverer in his own right. When you read our works, you will find that the entire texture of the writing is of equal quality. You cannot pick out a single good thing, because the whole body of the work is good. We do not have windows of wisdom. The light shines through the entire building. Stop relying on these hand-me-down snippets. It is a shameful thing for an adult to be constantly looking for a quote to sustain them. A man should be producing his own thoughts, not just acting as a guardian for someone else's. How long will you march under another man's orders? Take command. Say something of your own that posterity can remember. Those who have gone before us are our guides, not our masters. Truth is open to all. It has not been fully occupied. The person who follows another follows nothing. They find nothing. They do not even look. We should use the old paths, but if a newer and shorter way is found, we should pave it. Our predecessors were not our lords, but our leaders. They started the work. They did not finish it. Letter 228. On quiet conversation, I am glad that we can correspond so frequently, but remember that the written word, while useful, is never as effective as the living voice. A letter is a formal thing. It arrives after a delay and speaks to a distant person. But conversation is intimate and immediate. It creeps into the soul and finds its way into the hidden corners of the mind. Philosophical teaching does not require the booming voice of a public orator. It works best in quiet, private exchanges, just as a small amount of seed, when cast into the right soil, spreads its roots and eventually produces a great harvest. So too can a few well-chosen words, spoken in confidence, take root in a person's character and transform their entire life. We do not need a flood of words. We need words that are effective. A great speaker might dazzle an audience, but a true friend speaking quietly across a table can change a heart. The goal is not to fill the ears, but to settle in the mind. When we talk, we are planting seeds. If the soil is ready, those seeds will grow. If the mind is distracted or resistant, no amount of eloquence will help. Focus on the depth of what is said, not the volume. Letter XL. On proper style for a philosopher. You mentioned a certain philosopher whose speech is so rapid and relentless that the words seem to tumble over one another in a frantic rush. You asked if this is a style I would recommend. My answer is a firm no. A man who is teaching how to live should not speak as if he is trying to win a race. The speech of a philosopher should be composed, dignified, and clear. If it is too fast, the listener has no time to digest the thoughts. The words fly past like birds in flight, leaving no trace behind. How can a mind be healed by a physician who is in such a hurry that he cannot even stop to explain the cure? Furthermore, this rapid-fire delivery is often a sign of a disordered mind. Just as a man's gait reveals his character, so too does his speech. A steady, purposeful walk suggests a steady, purposeful soul. A frantic, stumbling way of speaking suggests a mind that is not in control of itself. Public orators might use these tricks to stir up a crowd, but we are not looking for applause. We are looking for improvement. We want our words to sink in, to be weighed and considered. A philosopher's speech should be like his life, disciplined, orderly, and focused on the truth. Do not be impressed by someone who speaks many words in a minute. Be impressed by someone who speaks the right words at the right time. Letter Exodi. On the God within us. There is no need to raise your hands toward the heavens or to implore the keeper of a temple to let you stand closer to the ear of a sacred statue, as if being nearer would ensure your prayers are better heard. God is not distant from you. He is with you. He is within you. I tell you this, Lucilius, a Holy Spirit resides within our hearts, observing our every action, both the good and the bad, and acting as our guardian. As we treat this Spirit, so it treats us in return. Indeed, no man can truly be called good without the aid of God. Can anyone rise above the whims of fortune unless he helps them to stand? It is he who provides us with noble and upright inspirations. If you should find yourself in a grove of ancient trees that have grown to a height beyond the reach of the eye, shutting out the sky with their dense, overlapping branches, the sheer majesty of the wood, the solitude of the place, and the mystery of such unbroken shade will strike you with a sense of divine presence. If a cave, formed by deep-seated rocks, holds up a mountain on its natural arches, or if the headwaters of a great river burst suddenly from the earth, you feel an instinctive urge to build an altar. We venerate the sources of great streams and the hidden depths of stagnant lakes. Yet, if you see a man who is untroubled by danger, untouched by cravings, happy in the face of adversity and calm amidst the storm, someone who looks down upon human affairs from a superior height, do you not feel a sense of veneration for him? Do you not say to yourself, this quality is too great and too sublime to be the product of this tiny body? A divine power has descended into that person, a soul that is magnificent and disciplined, which passes through the world as if it were above it, is moved by a celestial force. Just as the rays of the sun reach down to the earth but remain part of the source from which they are sent, so a great and holy soul, though it interacts with us, still clings to its origin. It looks toward its source and moves among us as a superior being. What is this soul? It is reason perfected. This is the unique good of man. Other qualities he shares with the animals. A horse is valued for its speed, not its golden harness. Why then should you value a man for his wealth or his status? A man should be praised for what is truly his own. If he has a beautiful house, many servants, or a great name, these are all external. The only thing that truly belongs to him is his mind. If that mind is straight, clear, and in harmony with the will of nature, then he has achieved the true purpose of his existence. Letter Fixby. On a new book by Lucilius, I received the book you sent, and I intended to read it at my leisure, perhaps setting it aside for a time when I was less occupied. However, the moment I opened it, I found myself so captivated that I could not put it down. It drew me in and held my attention so firmly that I read it through from beginning to end without a pause. The sun was already inviting me to a walk, and hunger was reminding me of the hour, but I ignored them both. I was impressed by the eloquence of your style and the depth of your thought. There was a certain weight to your words, not the heavy, sluggish weight of a pedant, but the strong, muscular force of a man who knows what he is talking about. You have managed to combine the charm of a poet with the rigor of a philosopher. I will not say that you have reached the summit yet, but you are certainly on the right path. Your writing has a vitality that is rare in these times. It does not feel like a collection of borrowed ideas, but like the sincere expression of a living soul. I found myself agreeing with your arguments even before I had finished reading them. I will send you a more detailed critique once I have had time to digest the work more thoroughly. For now, I simply wanted to congratulate you on your progress. You are proving that the study of wisdom does not have to be dry or dull. It can be as vibrant and engaging as any work of art. Keep writing, Lucilius. You have found your voice, and it is a voice that deserves to be heard. Letter 6 and 7. On Master and Slave. I was very pleased to hear from those who have visited you that you live on intimate terms with your slaves. This is exactly what I would expect from a man of your discernment and learning. They are only slaves, some might say. No, they are fellow human beings. They are mere chattels. No, they are our housemates. They are lowly servants. No, they are our humble friends. Or rather, our fellow slaves, if you consider that fortune has as much power over us as she has over them. I find it absurd that people should judge a man by his status rather than his character. We treat our slaves with such arrogance and cruelty, as if they were not made of the same flesh and blood as ourselves. We sit at our lavish banquets, gorging ourselves until we are sick, while our servants are forbidden to even move their lips to speak. The slightest murmur is met with the lash. We expect them to stand for hours in silence, serving our every whim, while we treat them as if they were less than animals, and then we wonder why they hate us. We have a proverb that says, "As many enemies as there are slaves." But they are not our enemies by nature. We make them our enemies by our treatment of them. If we treated them with kindness and respect, if we spoke with them and sat at the same table with them, we would find that they are capable of the most extraordinary loyalty. Remember that the man you call your slave was born from the same seed as you, enjoys the same sky, and breathes, lives, and dies just as you do. You might just as easily have been the slave and he the master. In the shifting tides of fortune, no one's position is secure. How many men of high birth were reduced to slavery during the wars? How many who once commanded armies now serve as stable boys? Do not look at a man's rank, but at his heart. You will find that some of your slaves have a more noble spirit than many of your so-called friends. Virtue is not restricted by birth. It is open to everyone. A slave can be brave, just, and wise. Treat your subordinates as you would have your superiors treat you. If you want to be respected, you must be respectful. Love cannot be forced by the whip. It can only be won by kindness. By living on these terms with your household, you are not lowering yourself, you are elevating them, and in doing so, you are proving your own worth as a philosopher. Letter 5. On quibbling as unworthy of the philosopher. You have brought to my attention certain logical puzzles and intricate verbal traps that some of our contemporaries are fond of using. They claim these exercises sharpen the mind, but I tell you, Lucilius, they are nothing more than a waste of precious time. When a man is drowning, he does not ask for a lesson in the mechanics of water. He asks for a hand to pull him out. We are all, in a sense, drowning in our own vices and fears. The world is on fire, and you bring me word games? There is a sort of intellectual vanity that delights in catching an opponent in a contradiction or leading them into a linguistic dead end. These people argue over whether a man who says he is lying is telling the truth, or they construct syllogisms that serve no purpose other than to display their own cleverness. But what does this do for the soul? Does it cure greed? Does it temper anger? Does it prepare a man for the inevitable arrival of death? Philosophy is the study of how to live, not how to talk. We should be using our reason to untangle the knots of the heart, not the knots of the tongue. Life is short, and we have much to learn that is of vital importance. Every moment spent on these trivialities is a moment stolen from the pursuit of wisdom. If you wish to exercise your mind, do so by wrestling with the great problems of existence, the nature of the good, the certainty of fate, and the path to inner tranquility. A true philosopher speaks with a directness and a simplicity that reflects the clarity of his mind. He has no need for shadows or trickery. His goal is to be understood, not to be admired for his complexity. Let us leave the quibbling to those who have nothing better to do. We have a life to save, our own. Letter Laurie. On the faults of the spirit. I was recently caught in a storm at sea while traveling to my villa. The experience was more than just physically uncomfortable. It was a vivid reminder of how the mind reacts to sudden danger. I noticed that while I was being tossed about by the waves, my physical discomfort, a recurring seasickness, distracted me from the actual peril of the ship. This is often the case with the faults of the spirit. When we are afflicted by minor vices or temporary anxieties, we are so focused on the immediate nausea of the situation that we fail to see the greater danger we are in. A person who is slightly ill knows they are sick and seeks a remedy, but a person who is profoundly ill, whose mind is entirely consumed by greed or lust or ambition, often believes themselves to be perfectly healthy. In fact, the worse the condition of the soul, the less the person perceives it. This is why we must be so diligent in our self-examination. We must learn to recognize the symptoms of a disordered mind before they become chronic. If you find yourself constantly restless, or if you are perpetually dissatisfied with what you have, do not mistake this for a mere passing mood. It is a sign that your spirit is out of alignment with nature. Philosophy is the only medicine that can cure these deep-seated ailments. But unlike physical medicine, which we take only when we are visibly sick, philosophy must be our daily bread. We must immerse ourselves in it until its principles become part of our very constitution. Do not wait for a storm to test your character. Build your inner strength while the seas are calm, so that when the waves do rise, you will remain steady at the helm. Let her live on the shortness of breath and death. My old enemy, the gasping for breath that the physicians call the rehearsal of death, has paid me another visit. It comes on suddenly, as if to choke the life out of me, and for a few moments I am forced to confront the reality of my own dissolution. It is a terrifying sensation, yet I find that I can meet it with a certain grim curiosity. I say to myself, what is this? Is death trying to test me? I have long made it my practice to contemplate death, so when it knocks at the door, I am not entirely surprised. I view this shortness of breath as a reminder that the lease on this body is nearing its end. Most people fear death because they think of it as a state of non-existence that is somehow painful or tragic. But consider the time before you were born. Were you unhappy then? Did you feel the lack of the world? Death is simply a return to that same state of stillness. It is the end of the journey, the point where the burden of existence is finally laid down. Why should we fear the end of a process that we did not fear the beginning of? To be dead is simply to be what we were before we began to live. Nature has given us a certain span of time to play our part on the stage, and when the curtain falls, we should exit with dignity. Whether the play was long or short is of no consequence. What matters is that we played our part well. I am not in a hurry to leave, for there is still much to appreciate in this life. But when the breath finally fails for the last time, I hope to meet it with the same equanimity that I have practiced during these temporary rehearsals. Death is not an enemy to be fought, but a law of nature to be accepted. Letter LV. On Vatia's villa. I have only just returned from a journey in my litter, and I find myself feeling as utterly exhausted as if I had traversed the entire distance on my own 2 feet. Even being carried for an extended period demands a certain toll from the body, and I suspect this fatigue arises precisely because such passivity goes against our nature. We were given legs to walk the earth and eyes to survey it. When we surrender to soft living and allow others to carry us, we gradually forfeit our natural vitality. We lose the capacity to perform the very actions we have long grudged doing. However, I felt the need to subject my body to some motion, perhaps to clear a tightness in my throat, or to ease a heaviness in my breathing, as I have often found that the shaking of a carriage provides a measure of physical relief. I allowed the journey to stretch on, drawn forward by the inviting sweep of the coastline that curves between Cumae and the secluded estate once belonging to Servilius Vatia. A recent storm had battered the shore, leaving the sand tightly packed and firm beneath the bearer's feet, whereas a prolonged calm inevitably leaves the beach dry and yielding. As is my custom, I gazed about, searching for some reflection or observation that might yield spiritual profit, and my eyes settled upon Vatia's famous villa. This was the sanctuary where Vatia, a man of immense wealth and former praetor, chose to spend the waning years of his life. He was known for nothing else but this retreat, and for that single reason he was considered by the public to be profoundly fortunate. During those turbulent times when political alliances were a matter of life and death, when men were ruined for being friends of Asinius Gallus, or enemies of Sejanus, or even for being too devoted to Sejanus, people would point to this estate and exclaim that Vartia alone knew how to live. But they were entirely mistaken. Vartia did not know how to live. He merely knew how to hide. There is a vast, unbridgeable chasm between a life of thoughtful retirement and a life of cowardly retreat. Whenever I passed his estate while he still drew breath, I could not help but mutter to myself, "Here lies Vartia," as if walking past a tomb. Philosophy, Lucilius, is such a sacred and awe-inspiring pursuit that even a counterfeit version of it can fool the undiscerning crowd. When a man flees from the public eye, the mob assumes he has achieved a serene independence, living entirely for himself and free from worldly cares. But that supreme state of self-sufficiency belongs solely to the true philosopher. He is the only one who genuinely knows how to live for himself, because he alone understands the fundamental art of living. The man who scurries away from society, driven into hiding by his own frustrated ambitions or his inability to witness the success of others, is not living for himself. He has retreated like a frightened animal to its den, living only for his appetites, his slumber, and his baser passions. Let us not confuse isolation with independence. Simply because a man is of no use to anyone else does not mean he is of true use to himself. As for the villa itself, I can only describe its outward face. I observed 2 magnificent artificial grottos, each vast enough to serve as a grand hall, engineered so that one remains in perpetual shadow while the other catches the sun until the very last moments of twilight. There is a grove of plane trees and a channel that behaves like a tidal river flowing between the sea and the nearby lake, teeming with fish that are spared by the local nets until foul weather drives the fishermen inland. Its greatest advantage, however, is that it sits on the doorstep of Baiae, enjoying the pleasures of that resort without suffering its clamorous disadvantages. It captures the western breezes entirely, making it a comfortable haven throughout the turning seasons. Yet we must remember that a location contributes nothing to our inner peace. It is the spirit that dictates our contentment. I have seen men drowning in misery amidst the most idyllic country estates, and I have seen men appearing frantic and overburdened in the deepest rural isolation. Do not imagine that your current residence is the cause of any restlessness you feel. Why should distance matter? You can transport your thoughts directly to me. We have the power to enjoy the company of absent friends whenever we wish, and for as long as we choose. Indeed, this imaginative communion is often sweeter than physical proximity. When friends are constantly at hand, we tend to take them for granted, parting without a second thought. But when separated by miles, we realize how much we truly possess them in our minds. The spirit knows no boundaries. It traverses the globe in an instant. Share your studies, your meals, and your walks with me in your mind, Lucilius. Life would be a narrow prison indeed if our imaginations were confined to the physical space our bodies occupy. Letter Sigh. On quiet and study, I must confess that I wholly disagree with the common assumption that absolute silence is essential for a man who wishes to withdraw into study. At this very moment, I am surrounded by an absolute babel of noise. I have taken lodgings directly above a public bathhouse. I ask you to imagine every conceivable sound capable of driving a man to distraction. When the athletic types are below, straining with heavy weights, I can hear their grunts of exertion, the whistling intake of breath, and the harsh expulsions of air as they push their bodies to the limit. If my attention shifts to a more sluggish patron receiving a cheap massage, I hear the rhythmic slapping of the masseur's hands against flesh, the sound changing pitch depending on whether the palm strikes flat or cupped. If a ball player arrives and begins bellowing out the score, the cacophony is complete. Add to this the sudden uproar of a scuffle, the shouts of a thief being apprehended, the resonant echoing of a man who delights in the sound of his own voice while bathing, and the tremendous splash of bathers hurling themselves into the pool. Beyond these natural human noises, there is the piercing, relentless cry of the hair plucker advertising his services, only pausing when he is actively torturing a client and making the poor man scream in his stead. Woven through it all are the competing shouts of the sausage seller, the pastry vendor, and the various hawkers from the catering shops, each singing out his wares in a distinctive, inescapable cadence. You might assume I am made of iron or entirely deaf to remain unbothered by this auditory assault, especially since we know that the philosopher Chrysippus was once driven to distraction merely by the sound of people saying, "Good morning." But I give you my word, I pay no more attention to this riot of noise than I would to the rushing of a waterfall or the crashing of ocean waves. General noise simply batters against the ears. It is the articulate voice, I find, that threatens to seize the attention. I have trained my mind to remain securely anchored within itself, entirely indifferent to the external chaos. So long as there is no turbulence in my own soul, the world outside can erupt into absolute bedlam. True quiet is not the absence of noise, it is the absence of internal conflict. What good does it do to have a silent neighborhood if one's own desires, fears, and greeds are shouting down one another inside the mind? We often mistakenly quote the poets who speak of the night bringing a peaceful stillness that lulls the world to rest. This is an illusion. Nighttime does not erase our anxieties, it merely brings them out of the shadows. The man who demands absolute quiet in his grand house, forcing his servants to walk on tiptoe and speak in whispers, still tosses and turns in his bed, tormented by phantom sounds. The noise is not in the room, it is in his unsettled spirit. We frequently deceive ourselves about our motives for retirement. We claim we are exhausted by public life or disgusted by political maneuvering, when in truth, our ambition has not been extinguished, but only temporarily fatigued or wounded by failure. The same is true of luxury. A man might retreat to a simple life only to find his old cravings returning with a vengeance, precisely because they were suppressed rather than truly conquered. Vice is always most dangerous when it pretends to be cured. If we have genuinely turned our backs on the superficial world, no amount of external clamor can break our concentration. A mind that startles at every shout or passing cart is an unstable mind, still heavily invested in the physical world and terrified for its own safety. It is the baggage of our worldly attachments that makes us cowards. When your mind is perfectly at peace, neither the roar of a crowd nor the clash of arms can disturb you. You might ask why, if I have achieved this immunity, I still plan to move to a quieter location. I concede that simply removing oneself from the noise is the easier path. My stay above the bathhouse was an exercise, a test of my own resolve. There is no virtue in suffering unnecessary torture indefinitely when a remedy is easily available. Like Ulysses stopping the ears of his men against the sirens, one can acknowledge a distraction without feeling compelled to endure it forever. Letter Lothraid. On grief for lost friends. I am deeply saddened to receive the news of your friend Flaccus's passing. I know the weight of this loss, but I urge you not to let your grief stretch beyond the bounds of reason. I would not be so harsh as to demand that you shed no tears at all, though in the absolute ideal of philosophical perfection, such an unbroken calm would be best. But we are still mortal, still striving, and a sudden blow will inevitably draw a response. A man who feels nothing is not brave, he is merely made of stone. Therefore, let your tears fall, but do not let them become a torrent, and ensure that it is you who brings them to an end. The eyes of a man who has lost a dear companion should be neither completely dry nor endlessly streaming. There is a place for sorrow, but there is no place for theatrical lamentation. If the greatest of Greek poets could write that even the grief-stricken Niobe eventually remembered she had to eat, surely we can limit the duration of our visible despair. We must be honest with ourselves about the nature of our weeping. Often, our extended mourning is not a pure expression of love, but a demonstration to others. We cry to prove to the world that we are suffering. We wear our grief as a badge. This is a pathetic folly to taint our sorrow with vanity and public display. You might ask if I'm suggesting you should simply forget a man who meant so much to you. Not at all. But if your memory of him is entirely bound up in your present agony, you will not remember him for long. Human nature cannot sustain perpetual misery. Soon enough, a distraction will arise, a smile will break through, and the sharp edge of the sorrow will dull. Instead of clinging to the pain, we must transform our recollection of the departed into a source of gentle pleasure. No one willingly dwells on memories that bring nothing but anguish. It is natural that the name of a lost friend will initially cause a pang in the heart, but that pang can carry its own sweetness. My teacher Attalus compared the memory of lost friends to the taste of certain bitter fruits or deeply aged wines, where the sharpness itself is part of the appeal. He believed that while the living bring us honeyed joy, the dead bring a pleasure tinged with a pleasant sorrow. I take a slightly different view. To me, thinking of those who have gone before us is purely sweet. When I enjoyed their living company, I always knew the time would come when I would lose them. Now that they are gone, I hold fast to the thought that I once had them. Therefore, Lucilius, accept the scales of fortune with a steady hand. She has taken away, but she first gave. Let this loss serve as a stark reminder to cherish the friends you still have. We spend so much of our time neglecting those who are alive, traveling far away, missing opportunities to visit, letting days slip by, only to erupt into frantic mourning when they die. We act as if our tears can retroactively prove the devotion we failed to show when they were here. If we have other friends, we insult them by acting as if their presence means nothing in the face of the one we lost. If we have no other friends, the fault is entirely our own. We mourn the loss of one companion, yet we fail to cultivate any others. A man who loses his only cloak to a thief is a fool if he sits in the cold wailing about it, rather than seeking a new garment to warm himself. You have buried a friend. Now go out and find another to love. It is a far nobler tribute to make a new friend than to endlessly cry over a dead one. I know it is a common observation, but I will say it regardless. Time eventually heals all wounds. For an educated and striving mind, however, it is shameful to wait for time to run out of patience with your grief. You should abandon your sorrow before your sorrow abandons you. Look closely at the mourners who had to be physically restrained at the graveside. Within weeks, their tears are dry. Nothing exhausts the sympathy of others faster than a grief that refuses to yield. I say these things to you as a man who once failed this very test. When I lost my dearest friend, Aeneas Serenus, I was completely shattered. I wept without restraint and allowed myself to be conquered by despair. Looking back, I see clearly the root of my error. I had never truly accepted the possibility that he might die before me. I relied on the simple math of his youth, forgetting that the fates do not consult the ledger of our birth years. Let us not repeat this mistake. Let us view every person we love as a mortal being whose lease on life can be cancelled without warning. The friend you mourn has not been annihilated. If the ancient wisdom holds true, he has merely travelled ahead on the road we all must walk. Letter L5. On the First Cause, a letter on metaphysics. Yesterday, my health granted me a partial reprieve. The morning was lost to a bout of illness, but the afternoon was surrendered to me. I began by reading, testing my stamina. Finding myself capable, I pushed further and took up my pen, writing with an intense, perhaps stubborn concentration until my friends intervened. They practically wrested the materials from my hands, scolding me for behaving like an invalid who refuses to acknowledge his own frailty. The writing thus gave way to conversation, and our discussion soon circled a philosophical dispute, which I now submit to you, Lucilius, for your arbitration. You are familiar with the Stoic doctrine regarding the fundamental nature of the universe. We maintain that all things derive from two elemental principles: matter and cause. Matter is inert, a passive substance brimming with infinite potential, but it will sit idle for eternity unless something sets it in motion. Cause, which is synonymous with reason or God, is the active power that shapes this sluggish matter, bending it to its will and molding it into the infinite variety of the cosmos. Every created thing, therefore, requires a substance from which it is made and a force by which it is made. If we look at a bronze statue, the bronze represents the matter and the sculptor represents the cause. The Stoics believe there is only one true cause, the creative agent. Aristotle, however, complicates the picture by arguing that the term cause has a fourfold meaning. He states that the first cause is the material itself, for without the bronze, the statue cannot exist. The second cause is the craftsman who works the metal. The third cause is the form or the specific shape impressed upon the material, the design that makes it a statue of a spearman rather than a bowl. Finally, he proposes a fourth cause, the purpose or end goal. This is the motive that drove the sculptor to work, whether it be for financial gain, personal glory, or religious devotion. Plato expands this even further, adding a fifth cause to Aristotle's four, the ideal model, or the idea. This is the perfect, eternal pattern existing in the mind of the creator, the template which the craftsman attempts to replicate in the physical world. According to Plato, God possesses within himself these perfect models for everything in the universe. Thus, we have the material, the agent, the form, the ideal model, and the purpose. When applied to the universe itself, God is the agent. The unformed substance is the material. The arrangement of the cosmos is the form. The divine blueprint is the model, and the purpose as Plato asserts, is the expression of God's inherent goodness. I ask you to judge this debate. To my mind, the expanded lists of Aristotle and Plato are both flawed. If they insist that a cause is anything without which a creation cannot occur, they have not gone far enough. They should include time, for nothing is made without time. They should include space and motion. But this is a chaotic blurring of definitions. We Stoics are searching for the primary, general, and effective cause. This must be a singular elementary force. Just as matter is an elementary substance, that singular cause is creative reason. God himself. The form, the model, and the purpose are not independent causes. They are merely attributes or instruments of the one true agent. The sculptor's purpose is not a cause. It is an accessory to the cause. You may wonder why I spend my time unraveling these intricate metaphysical knots. You might ask what practical benefit this has for curing our emotional ailments or freeing us from worldly fears. I assure you, such contemplation is not a waste of time. While my primary duty is the moral examination of my own soul, exploring the architecture of the cosmos provides a profound spiritual release. The mind, burdened and confined by this heavy, fragile body, yearns to look beyond its earthly prison. When a craftsman strains his eyes in the dim light of his workshop, he must step outside to refresh his vision in the brilliant sun. Similarly, the soul, trapped in the gloom of physical existence, finds its true relaxation and expansion by lifting its gaze to the heavens. The philosopher is inevitably tethered to his flesh, but the highest part of his nature remains detached, wandering freely among the stars. He views his mortal lifespan merely as a term of military service, neither clinging to it with desperation nor despising it. To forbid me from investigating the origins of the universe, the nature of the divine architect, or the ultimate destiny of the soul is to order me to crawl through life with my eyes pinned to the dirt. I was born for greater things than to be a slave to my digestion and my physical comforts. My body is nothing but a temporary shackle. I place it willingly in the path of fortune's blows, refusing to let those strikes penetrate to my inner self. By studying the divine reason that commands the physical universe, I learn to let my own reason command my physical body. Let the lesser serve the greater, and we will find the courage to face whatever transitions lie ahead. Letter Lexis Seventh, on facing death with equanimity. Just today, a sudden wave of excitement swept over the Campanian coastline as the advance ships from Alexandria, the fast-sailing mail packets, appeared on the horizon. These are the vessels sent ahead to herald the arrival of the great Egyptian trade fleet, and their silhouette is always a welcome sight to the locals. The entire population of Puteoli seemed to abandon their daily routines, rushing to the wharves to crowd the waterfront. Even from a distance, it is easy to pick out the Alexandrian ships from the multitude of other vessels, for they alone are permitted by regulation to keep their topsails unfurled. Out on the open ocean, all ships maximize their canvas to catch the upper winds, but as they navigate the narrow straits near Capri, standard vessels are required to reduce their sails. Only the Alexandrians are granted the privilege of displaying their full billowing rig. While the rest of the world hurried toward the docks in a frantic scramble, I found a profound satisfaction in simply remaining exactly where I was. Though I knew there would likely be letters waiting for me, carrying news of my distant financial interests and reports from my stewards, I felt not the slightest urgency to read them. I have long since reached a point where the fluctuations of profit and loss hold no power over my peace of mind. This detachment is a comfort that should ideally belong to any thoughtful person, but I must admit that the sheer weight of my advancing years makes it far easier to achieve. When one is old, the realization dawns that no matter how depleted one's traveling funds might be, there is still more than enough remaining to cover the exceedingly short distance left on the journey. Unlike a worldly expedition, which is deemed a failure if you are forced to stop halfway, the journey of life does not require you to reach the farthest possible milestone to be considered complete. The only metric that matters is the honor and integrity with which the journey is made. Whenever the moment comes to step off the road, if you do so with dignity, your life is a finished, unbroken whole. In fact, there are many circumstances where a man should embrace his departure not merely with courage, but without needing to be driven to the absolute extremity of endurance. Consider the case of our mutual acquaintance, Tullius Marcellinus. He was a man who found a quiet wisdom early in his days, yet he was recently afflicted with a disease that, while perhaps not immediately fatal, was agonizing, relentless, and incurable in its daily humiliations. He gathered his closest friends to deliberate on whether he should take his own life. Naturally, the timid among the group offered hesitant, non-committal advice, while the flatterers merely echoed whatever they assumed he wanted to hear. But one of our Stoic companions, a man of magnificent fighting spirit, spoke up with a clarity that cut through the agonizing indecision. He told Marcellinus not to torture himself as though he were making some earth-shattering choice. Living itself is not an inherently great achievement, he reminded him. Every beast in the field and every lowly slave manages to stay alive. What is truly great is to die with a mind that is enlightened, courageous, and free. Reflect upon how long you have been trapped in the exact same repetitive cycle, eating, sleeping, indulging the flesh, only to wake and do it all again. The desire for the final exit need not be born only of supreme misery or supreme heroism. Sometimes it is simply the natural response of a refined palate that has had its fill of a tedious banquet. Marcellinus needed no further convincing. He only required a facilitator. When his household slaves wept in terror, fearing they would be punished for allowing their master's death, our Stoic friend gently reassured them, explaining that their only danger lay in interfering with a free man's voluntary choice. Marcellinus, showing his characteristic generosity, distributed his remaining cash among his weeping servants, offering them comfort as they mourned him. He required no violent blade or bloody spectacle. He simply abstained from food for 3 days, then ordered a steam tent erected in his bedchamber. A hot bath was drawn, and as the warm water was continually replenished, he slipped away into the ether. He noted in his final moments that the sensation was not one of agony, but rather a gentle, swooning dissolution, a fading out that carried its own strange sweetness. I share this story not to be morbid, but because such examples are the armor we desperately need. Too many of us march toward the inevitable end, wailing and looking over our shoulders, horrified by the one truth no mortal can escape. How absurd would it be to watch a man burst into tears because he was not alive 1,000 years ago? It is equally ridiculous to weep because you will not be alive 1,000 years from now. Both spans of time belong to the vast abyss of non-existence. You are plunged into this specific sliver of time. What does it matter if you stretch it by a few extra breaths? The decree of the cosmos is absolute. The great procession of mortality sweeps everything along, and a multitude of souls will take their final breath in the exact same second that you take yours. If you seek models of courage, you need not look only to bearded philosophers. History tells us of a captive Spartan boy, a mere child, who was ordered to perform a degrading, filthy task for his conquerors. Shouting in his native tongue that he would never be a slave, he deliberately dashed his head against a stone wall, shattering his own skull. Freedom was that close at hand. Would you not rather a child of yours possess that ferocious dignity than live to be a trembling, cowardly centenarian? What is it that truly holds you back? You have already exhausted the novelties of the physical world. The finest wines merely pass through your bladder. The rarest delicacies have long since ceased to thrill your jaded palate. Confess it, you are not clinging to life because you have great civic duties left to perform or profound philosophical truths left to uncover. You are clinging to it out of a pathetic reluctance to leave the fish market and the banquet hall. You tell me you want to live, but I ask you, do you actually know how to live? Or is your current existence indistinguishable from a walking death? Remember, it does not matter at what point the play ends. The length of the performance is irrelevant. What matters is the quality of the acting, and that you bring the final curtain down with a flawless, unforgettable grace. Letter Lucilius on the healing power of the mind. It pains me deeply to read that your chronic catarrh has returned, bringing with it those prolonged fevers that sap your strength and weary your spirit. I am acutely sympathetic to your condition, for I battled the very same affliction in my youth. At first, possessing the stubborn resilience of a young man, I tried to ignore it, treating the illness with a reckless defiance. But eventually, the sickness broke my defenses. I was reduced to a skeletal shadow, the constant respiratory distress draining away my vital forces until I was little more than a ghost. I must confess that during the darkest hours of that ordeal, I frequently harbored the urge to end my life and escape the suffocation. The only tether that kept me bound to this world was the thought of my elderly father. I knew that while I possessed the fortitude to die, he did not possess the fortitude to survive my loss. And so, commanding myself to endure, I chose to live for his sake. Let us never forget that there are moments when merely drawing breath is an act of profound heroism. Since we are sharing the same hospital ward of human frailty, let me prescribe the remedies that ultimately saved me. You will find that the medicine of the mind is often far more potent than any physical tonic. My true salvation was philosophy. It was the pursuit of Stoic wisdom that gave me the strength to rise from my sickbed. I literally owe my life to the therapeutic power of rational thought. But equal credit must be given to the devotion of my friends, their presence at my bedside, their encouraging words, and the sheer warmth of their company acted as a profound restorative. When you know that you live in the hearts of noble companions, the dread of death begins to evaporate. You realize that even if your body fails, your spirit will continue to reside in the memories and affections of those you leave behind. To surrender your will to live when you have such people relying on you is not just tragic, it is deeply ungrateful. When we break down the experience of illness, we find that it brings three primary torments: the terror of dying, the agony of physical pain, and the deprivation of our customary pleasures. Let us dismiss the first torment immediately. You are not going to die because you have caught a fever. You are going to die because you were born. Illness is merely one of 1,000 different vehicles that might transport you to a destination that is already fixed. In fact, surviving a severe sickness often grants a man a clarified perspective, acting as a fiery forge that purifies his appreciation for the days he has left. As for the second torment, physical suffering, nature has woven a profound mercy into the fabric of our biology. Pain operates on a sliding scale of intensity and duration. If a pain is excruciatingly sharp, it cannot last long. The human nervous system simply cannot sustain maximum agony indefinitely. It either resolves or it triggers a numb, dazed stupor that entirely shuts off the sensation. A localized torture like gout or a severe toothache may scream for attention, but its very ferocity eventually exhausts the nerves, leading to intervals of blessed relief. The trick is to prevent the imagination from amplifying the distress of the body. The unenlightened man suffers twice, once in the flesh and once in the mind. He abandons his spiritual fortress and allows his entire consciousness to be dragged down into the complaining tissue of his physical form. He moans about his past agonies, exaggerating them for an audience, and he trembles at the thought of future pangs. "No one has ever suffered like this," he wails, inflating his misery. But what madness is it to make yourself wretched in the present moment simply because you were wretched yesterday? You must quarantine the pain in the exact moment it occurs. Stand your ground against it. If a heavy weight is falling toward you, stepping backward only ensures it will crush you with greater momentum. You must brace yourself and push back. Turn your thoughts away from the afflicted limb and fix them upon the heroic. Call to mind the men who have smiled while being stretched on the rack, or the philosopher who calmly continued to read a book while a surgeon sliced the varicose veins from his leg. If a man can conquer the tearing of flesh with a quiet smile, surely you can conquer a feverish cough with applied reason. Remind yourself that a sickbed is a battlefield, and the way you conduct yourself under the sheets is a public testament to your character. You may not be able to command a legion, but you can command your own groans, be your own strictest judge, and your own most appreciative audience. Finally, we come to the third grievance, the loss of physical pleasure. It is true that illness strips away the appetite for extravagant banquets and iced wines. But what a trivial loss this is. The craving for such things is an artificial sickness in itself. As your body weakens, the desires that once enslaved you simply fall away. You will find that an empty stomach no longer yearns for oysters imported from the Lucrine lake, nor does it demand that the kitchen be wheeled into the dining room to ensure the meat is scalding hot. You will be eating a meager diet, yes, but for the first time, you will be eating the way a healthy, natural human being was designed to eat. No physician can forbid you the higher, sweeter pleasures of the intellect. A mind engaged in exploring the architecture of the cosmos Unraveling the mysteries of virtue and understanding the divine order will never feel the lack of a spiced mushroom. Use this time of forced physical stillness to exercise the only part of you that is truly immortal. Do not view your bed as a prison, but as an academy. Letter Lex Stricht. On drunkenness. You have written asking me to provide a complete accounting of how I spend my days. It is a flattering request, for it assumes that my private life contains nothing shameful that I would wish to conceal behind closed doors. You are entirely correct in your underlying premise. A man ought to live his life as if the whole world were watching, and he should construct his thoughts as if another could peer directly into the innermost sanctuary of his mind. And indeed, someone can. What good does it do to hide a secret from our fellow mortals when God is already a permanent witness to our every hidden motive? Therefore, I will gladly open my ledger and review my daily routine for you. It is a highly beneficial practice to put oneself under this kind of daily cross-examination. Most men stumble blindly through life because they only look forward, projecting their desires into the future while completely ignoring the lessons of their own past. My days are now wonderfully uncluttered, devoted entirely to the quiet rhythm of the bed and the reading desk. I dedicate only a fraction of my time to physical exertion, and here I must offer a prayer of thanks for my advanced age. When you are old, exercise requires almost no effort. I merely have to move a few paces and I am instantly exhausted, which achieves the precise goal of any workout. I still keep a trainer, a young slave named Farius, but the poor boy is growing desperate. When we attempt to run together, the gap between us widens with humiliating speed. He is sprinting up the hill of youth, while I am tumbling down the steep descent of age. Very soon, I shall not even be able to manage a brisk walk with him. Following this exertion, I take my bath. I was once famous across Rome as a fanatic of the freezing plunge. I used to greet the new year by leaping into the icy waters of the Aqua Virgo, viewing the shock to my system as a badge of stoic endurance. Those days are gone. My campaigns have shifted from the Tiber to my own private pool, and even then I ensure the water has been thoroughly warmed by the sun before I so much as dip a toe. From there, it is a very short step to surrendering to the hot baths entirely. Afterward, I take a breakfast of dry bread, eaten without setting a formal table, requiring no washing of hands. Then comes a brief, fleeting nap, a momentary slipping of the mental harness, just enough to blur the edge of wakefulness without truly plunging into deep slumber. But let us turn from my routine to a matter of philosophy that has been vexing me. I have been reading Zeno, the venerable founder of our Stoic school. He was an indisputably great man, a paragon of moral courage. Yet I find myself fiercely disagreeing with the methods he uses to argue against drunkenness. Zeno attempts to prove that a wise man will never become intoxicated by constructing a neat, logical syllogism. He says, no man entrusts a vital secret to a drunkard. A man will entrust a vital secret to a wise man. Therefore, a wise man is not a drunkard. What an absurd, bloodless way to approach a devastating human failing. By this exact same structural logic, I could prove that a wise man never sleeps. I could say, no man entrusts a vital secret to a sleeping person. A man will entrust a secret to a wise man, therefore a wise man does not sleep. Furthermore, the premise itself is historically false. There are countless men who can hold their liquor terribly, yet hold a secret perfectly. Take Lucius Piso, the man who served as the warden of Rome under the emperors Augustus and Tiberius. Piso was perpetually intoxicated from the day he took office. He spent his entire night drinking at lavish banquets and slept through the morning, only rising at noon. Yet, despite being marinated in wine, he executed his duties as the guardian of the city with absolute precision. Both emperors trusted him with their most sensitive, highly classified directives, and he never once let a state secret slip from his wine-stained lips. The same was true of Cossus, another prefect of the city who was known to drink until he fell into comas so deep he had to be physically carried out of the Senate, yet who safely guarded the private correspondence of Tiberius. If we wish to steer a man away from the wine flask, we must not rely on clever little word games and syllogisms. We must confront him with the ugly, visceral truth of the vice itself. We must show him that drunkenness is nothing less than a voluntary, self-induced insanity. If a man behaved while sober the way he behaves while drunk, stumbling, vomiting, slurring, flying into sudden rage rages and weeping uncontrollably, we would immediately declare him a lunatic and lock him away. The only difference between the drunkard and the madman is that the drunkard's madness comes with a time limit. Do not give me logic puzzles. Give me the grim reality. Remind the student of Alexander the Great, who, in a drunken fury at a banquet, drove a spear through the heart of Clytus, his most loyal and beloved friend. When the fumes of the alcohol cleared and Alexander saw the bloody corpse of the man who had saved his life in battle, he wanted to die, and frankly, he deserved to. Drunkenness does not create new vices. It merely strips away the armor of shame and social restraint, allowing the darkest monsters of the human heart to run free. Consider the sheer indignity of the drunkard's physical state. He is entirely ignorant of his surroundings, his speech is slurred and indistinct, his eyes swim, and he cannot walk a straight line. The very room seems to spin around him as if caught in a cyclone, while the wine ferments and tortures his stomach. Where is the glory in mere capacity, when the whole room lies prostrate around you, snoring or vomiting, and you are the last man standing? Your victory is a hollow one. You have merely been conquered by a barrel. It was this same vice, coupled with a toxic infatuation for Cleopatra, that dragged down the great Mark Antony, turning a brilliant Roman leader into an enemy of his own state. It made him bloodthirsty, demanding the severed heads of his political opponents at his extravagant banquets, his cruelty inflamed by the wine. If you wish to cure a man of drunkenness, do not quote Zeno's neat logic to him. Show him the ugly, undeniable facts. Prove to him that when any so-called pleasure exceeds its natural boundaries, it becomes nothing less than a punishment. Letter 6. On Scipio's villa. Here I am, writing to you from the country estate at Liternum that once belonged to Scipio Africanus. I have paid my respects to his departed spirit and to an altar that I believe serves as his tomb. I am entirely convinced that his soul has returned to the heavens from which it came. My admiration for him is not based on the vast armies he commanded, for even madmen like Cambyses led massive hosts, but rather on his profound self-restraint and his unwavering sense of duty. To my mind, Scipio's greatness was never more apparent than on the day he deliberately left his country. The situation had reached a breaking point. Either Scipio had to remain in Rome, or Rome had to remain a free democracy. He chose the latter. Refusing to let his own immense prestige cast a shadow over the laws and institutions of the Republic, he went into voluntary exile. He declared that all citizens must be equal before the law, and if he had grown too great for the safety of the Constitution, he would remove himself. What a magnificent spirit! He gave way to the state, ensuring that Rome was just as indebted to him for his departure as it had been for his defeat of Hannibal. I have spent time exploring the house. It is built of solid, square stone blocks, surrounded by a wall and defensive towers like a fortress. Hidden among the trees is a cistern large enough to supply an army. But what struck me most profoundly was the bathhouse. It is a tiny, cramped room tucked away in a dark corner, exactly as our ancestors preferred. They believed a bath could only be properly hot if it was entirely cut off from the light. It gave me an intense, almost physical pleasure to compare Scipio's way of life with our own. In this dingy little hole, the great terror of Carthage washed a body that was legitimately weary from hard labor. He worked his own fields, keeping himself fit through honest toil. He stood beneath a crude, unplastered ceiling, and his feet rested on a cheap, uneven floor. Who today could endure bathing in such squalor? We feel ourselves reduced to the level of paupers unless our walls are blazing with massive, costly mirrors. We demand that our Alexandrian marbles be bordered by intricate panels of Numidian stone and that the ceilings be obscured by elaborate glass mosaics. We insist that the pools into which we lower our sweat-drained bodies be lined with Thasian marble, a stone once considered too precious even for temples, and we refuse to wash unless the water flows from solid silver taps. And this is only the standard for ordinary citizens. If you were to look at the bathhouses of wealthy ex-slaves, you would see forests of useless columns erected purely for display, and cascades of water engineered simply to make a pleasant splashing sound. We have become so fastidious that we balk at walking on anything but precious gems. In Scipio's bath, there are only tiny chinks in the heavy masonry to let in a sliver of light without compromising the wall's defensive strength. Today, people deride such a place as a moth hole. If a modern bathhouse is not designed with enormous windows to trap the sun from dawn to dusk, if a man cannot bake himself to a tan while taking in sweeping views of the sea and the countryside, he considers it unfit for use. There was a time when baths were simple, public utilities costing only a copper coin and built for hygiene, not for sensual diversion. The water was not a continuous gushing torrent, and no one cared if it was perfectly clear. They were there to wash off dirt, not to admire the plumbing. How magnificent it must have been to enter those half-lit rooms knowing that a man of supreme character, a Cato or a Fabius Maximus, serving as aedile, had personally inspected the premises to ensure the temperature was wholesome and moderate. Now, our baths are heated to the temperature of a roaring furnace, so hot that a slave convicted of a capital crime could be boiled alive in them. What a wretched life Scipio led, our modern sophisticates will say. Bathing in cloudy, unfiltered water, he didn't know how to live. But Scipio went to the bath to wash off honest sweat, not the sticky residue of exotic perfumes. And, to shock our modern sensibilities further, historians tell us he didn't even bathe every day. While here, I've also been speaking with Aegelus, the current owner of the estate, who is a master of agriculture. He showed me his techniques for transplanting old vines and olive trees, demonstrating how to gather the minute root hairs and pack the soil to encourage new growth even from thick stems. By constructing reservoirs, he has essentially brought the rain under his own command. It is a brilliant example of human reason mastering nature, but I will not share all his secrets with you, lest I inadvertently train you to become a competitor to him. Letter Likes Sveit. On liberal and vocational studies. You have asked for my opinion on the so-called liberal studies, the traditional curriculum of literature, geometry, and music. Let me be blunt. I have absolutely no respect for any study or pursuit whose ultimate goal is the making of money. Such occupations are inherently mercenary. They involve putting one's mind out to hire. They are useful only as a temporary training ground for young minds, something to occupy them until they are mature enough to grasp higher concepts. They are our apprenticeship, not our true life's work. We call them liberal studies because they were traditionally considered the only subjects worthy of a free man, but in truth, there is only one study that is genuinely liberal, because it is the only one that actually makes a person free, and that is the pursuit of wisdom. Philosophy's high ideals and unwavering spiritual focus make all other academic disciplines look childish and trivial by comparison. Look at the men who teach these subjects. You will often find them to be the most vain, irritable, and morally bankrupt individuals in society. Let us ask ourselves honestly, do these liberal studies actually make a person better? They do not even claim to. The literary scholar spends his days debating the exact meter of a poem, parsing syllables, or investigating the mythological ancestry of long-dead kings. Does knowing the precise finishing line of an ancient stadium help a man conquer his fear of death? Does an obsessive study of Virgil's vocabulary root out greed or bridle a raging temper? The mathematician can measure the exact boundaries of an estate, but he cannot teach a man how to measure the limits of his own desires. The musician knows how to tune a lyre so that the high notes and low notes blend into perfect harmony, but he has no idea how to bring his own soul into harmony with nature. What good is it to know how to navigate the stars or predict an eclipse if you are entirely lost when it comes to navigating the storms of your own life? If a man lacks moral knowledge, all the technical expertise in the world is worse than useless to him. Then there are the philosophers who fall into the trap of over-intellectualizing. They abandon the practical healing of the soul to indulge in logical acrobatics. Protagoras tells us that every argument has two equal and opposite sides, effectively destroying the concept of truth. Parmenides claims that nothing exists except the whole, while Zeno of Elea goes further and insists that nothing exists at all. Our universe, they say, is merely a deceptive illusion. I would advise you to take all these theories and toss them onto the same rubbish heap as the useless literary studies. The grammarians clutter my mind with trivia I do not need. But these philosophical hair splitters actually rob me of the little knowledge I do possess. One side offers no light to guide me, while the other gouges my eyes out entirely. If Protagoras is right, nothing is certain. If Zeno is right, I do not even exist to be uncertain. I have no patience for men who treat philosophy as a parlor trick or a commercial skill, living lives of petty indulgence while preaching lofty ideals from a podium. They are like a seasick helmsman in a violent storm, tossing up their dinners while the ship is dashed against the rocks. We do not need clever arguments to prove that nothing exists. We need practical armor to protect us against poverty, grief, and the terrors of the grave. Seek out the teachings that can be translated directly into action. Learn them so deeply that the words become works and leave the syllables to the pedants. Letter XC. On the civilizing influence of philosophy. Who can doubt, my dear Lucilius, that life itself is a gift from the immortal gods, but that living well is the profound and exclusive gift of philosophy? It would be easy to conclude that our debt to philosophy is greater than our debt to the gods, if it were not for the fact that the very capacity to philosophize was also bestowed upon us by them. Yet philosophy is not merely a tool for survival. It is the ultimate civilizing force that elevates us above our basic instincts. Consider the so-called Golden Age of antiquity. According to Posidonius, this era was governed by the wise. These early leaders did not gain their positions by mere physical dominance or intimidation. The bull who leads the herd is the one whose sheer bulk has brought him victory, and the tallest elephant naturally takes charge, but among human beings, true leadership was granted to the man of the highest moral character. Government was in the hands of the wise, who maintained peace, protected the weak from the strong, and foresaw what was advantageous for their people. To govern in those days was not to rule with an iron fist, but to serve. No king felt the need to try out the extent of his power over the very people who had granted it to him in the first place. But as vices gradually infiltrated society, the desire for wealth and domination corrupted these pure kingdoms, transforming them into tyrannies. It was then that the need arose for laws, which were themselves initially drafted by wise men like Solon, Lycurgus, Zaleucus, and Charondas. However, we must be careful not to mistake the practical inventions of early man for true philosophy. Some argue that philosophy taught men to build houses, forge tools, and weave garments. I must fiercely disagree. The mind that devised the hammer or the loom was an ingenious one, certainly, but not necessarily a wise one. The primitive men who lived in natural caves or beneath the unoppressive shade of a tree were not true philosophers. They were merely following the dictates of necessity. Their environment was unsullied by human interference, and they lived without the modern fear that their own elaborate roofs might collapse upon them. But innocence is not the same as virtue. It is one thing to refrain from wrongdoing because one is ignorant of it, and quite another to choose not to do wrong through the rigorous application of reason. These early men lacked the cardinal virtues of justice, moral insight, self-control, and courage. True virtue is an art that must be cultivated, schooled, and brought to perfection by unremitting practice. We are born with the potential for it, but not with the virtue itself. Even in the best of people, until you cultivate the mind, there is only the raw material for virtue, not the finished masterpiece. Letter Texi. On the burning of lions. My friend Liberalis is currently suffering deep distress upon hearing the news that his hometown of Lyons has been completely devastated by fire. Such a disaster would shake anyone, let alone a man so profoundly devoted to his birthplace. It has left him groping for that staunch resilience of spirit he usually displays when facing more predictable, everyday fears. But we can hardly blame him, for this catastrophe was virtually without precedent. Many cities have suffered damage by fire, but none has ever been so utterly blotted out in a single night. Even when buildings are set aflame by enemy hands in times of war, destruction is rarely so absolute as to leave nothing for a future fire to consume. Yet here, in a time of profound and universal peace, a showpiece of Gaul has been wiped from the face of the earth faster than I can recount the tale of its ruin. This should serve as a stark and urgent reminder to us all. Everything in the mortal realm lies under the sentence of mortality. We live among things that are destined to perish. Time will eventually sweep away the very traces of the most magnificent cities, and nature herself is not immune to destruction. Mountain massifs crumble, shorelines sink beneath the waves, and volcanic fires consume soaring peaks. Knowing this, we must bear the overthrow of cities with calm resignation. They stand only to eventually fall, whether it be the blast of an earthquake, the violence of floodwaters, or a sudden conflagration. The end result is the same. I advise Liberalis, and indeed all of us, to find comfort in the thought that a devastating setback often clears the ground for even greater prosperity. Many things have fallen only to rise to more exalted heights. Instead of mourning what is lost and trembling at the whims of fortune, we should recognize the fragility of all human constructs and build our true fortress within the mind, where no fire or earthquake can ever reach. Letter Civ. On care of health and peace of mind, I have just retreated to my estate at Nomentum. What was I fleeing? Not the noise of the city, but a creeping fever. I felt it just beginning to infiltrate my defenses. My pulse was disturbed and its natural rhythm upset. Instantly, I ordered my carriage, brushing aside my dear Paulina's anxious attempts to hold me back. I repeated the words of my mentor, Gallio, who, when sickening for a fever in Achaia, immediately boarded a ship, insisting that the disorder was rooted in the place, not in his own constitution. I must confess, as I reflect on how deeply Paulina's life is bound to my own, I find myself taking greater care of my health out of concern for hers. Old age normally brings the advantage of indifference to bodily frailties, but I am losing that advantage. Knowing that inside this aging frame is the heart of a young woman who depends on me, I must treat myself with an uncharacteristic leniency. Yet, we must not let our care for the body override our pursuit of spiritual peace. Merely changing one's location does not cure a restless mind. If you carry your fears and ambitions with you, no country retreat can offer true solace. To attain genuine peace of mind, one must stop running from external circumstances and start confronting the internal turmoil. Letter 7th. On obedience to the universal will, where is your moral insight? Where is your magnanimity? Are you truly going to let something so trivial upset you? Your slaves took advantage of your absorption in your affairs and ran away. Let them go. They were doing you no real service anyway, and you are better off without people who view your presence as insufferable. It is foolish to become agitated over such common occurrences. We must not be taken aback by the conditions we are born into. These things happen to everyone, and even if a man temporarily escapes them, he remains liable to them. The fairness of a universal law does not mean it strikes everyone equally at all times, but that it applies to everyone without exception. We must pay the taxes of our mortal state without grumbling. Winter brings the shivering cold. Summer brings the sweltering heat. We will inevitably encounter sickness, treacherous men, and natural disasters. These are the unbreakable rules of our existence which we cannot change. What we can control is our response. We must adopt a noble spirit, bearing up bravely under whatever fortune sends us, and bringing our own will into perfect harmony with the will of nature. Nature regulates the universe through opposites. Clear skies follow cloudy, storm follows calm, day succeeds night. This is the law our minds must accept. We should assume that whatever happens was bound to happen and cease our pointless railing against fate. It is a poor soldier who follows his commander with complaints. Let us receive our orders cheerfully, marching in step with the grand procession of the cosmos. As Cleanthes wrote, we must say to the Master of Heaven, "Lead me where you will. I am ready to obey. If I resist, I will suffer dishonorably and be dragged along regardless. Fate leads the willing and drags the reluctant. Let us choose to be led." Letter 8. On the approaches to philosophy. The subject you inquire about is one of those intellectual puzzles that offer no real benefit beyond the knowledge itself. Yet you are burning with an impatience to learn, eager to dive into the encyclopedia of ethics I am currently compiling. I will give you your answer, but first I must warn you about this voracious appetite for learning. If you are not careful, this unchecked enthusiasm will stand in its own way. We must not attack knowledge with a greedy, haphazard rush. The mind must be fed in proportion to its strength. Do not try to take on more than you can manage. When we read the great thinkers, we must do so with the right intentions. Too often, a literary scholar, a historical commentator, and a true philosopher will read the exact same text, like Cicero's The State, and extract entirely different things from it. The scholar looks for historical trivia or debates over the origins of syllable lengths. The commentator searches for archaic vocabulary or mythological genealogies, but the philosopher hunts for the noble, spirited teachings that can be immediately applied to the healing of his own soul. We must seek out the practical lessons, not the far-fetched figures of speech, and learn them so thoroughly that our words become our works. There is nothing more pathetic than a man who studies philosophy as if it were a commercial skill, spouting the wisdom of Plato or Zeno to an audience while living a life of indulgence and moral cowardice. He is like a seasick helmsman trying to navigate a violent storm. Do not gather knowledge simply to show it off. Gather it to forge a character capable of withstanding the trials of existence. Letter 40. On style as a mirror of character. You have raised a fascinating inquiry, wondering why it is that during certain epochs, a distinctly corrupt and degraded style of literature seems to take hold of a culture, and how an otherwise gifted mind can develop such a strong inclination toward literary flaws that an entire generation becomes infected by them. The answer lies in the profound connection between the way we write and the way we live. Just as a society's obsession with extravagant clothing, lavish banquets, and superficial display points to a deeper moral sickness within the community, an aberrant and convoluted literary style, when it becomes the fashion, is a clear symptom that the collective spirit has lost its way. It should come as no surprise that flawed writing finds such enthusiastic approval not only among the uneducated masses, but also among those who consider themselves cultured. The distinction between these two groups is often merely a matter of the garments they wear, rather than any genuine difference in perception. What is truly alarming is not just that they tolerate literature riddled with defects, but that they actively admire the defects themselves. Throughout history, great talents have always been granted a certain amount of leniency by their contemporaries. One can easily point to celebrated authors whose glaring stylistic faults never hindered their success, and some who were even propelled by them. In fact, there are figures of immense renown whose very brilliance is so entangled with their stylistic vices that to correct their writing would be to destroy its unique power. There are no absolute, unbending rules of style. It is a fluid thing, dictated by the ever-shifting tides of social usage. We see this in the way some writers deliberately drag archaic words from the distant past into their modern prose, finding the language of their own century too polished and refined. They resurrect the rugged, unhewn vocabulary of our ancestors, while others swing wildly to the opposite extreme. We see men who cannot bear to use a straightforward word, wrapping their thoughts in such diaphanous, colourful, and flamboyant language that their primary goal is clearly to draw attention to themselves. They wish to be looked at, and they hardly care if the gaze they attract is one of disapproval, so long as they are not ignored. Such a deliberate, calculated cultivation of error in writing is a direct reflection of a severely troubled soul. When a man is intoxicated, his speech only begins to slur and stumble after his mind has already surrendered to the wine. This corruption of style is precisely the same. It is a drunkenness of the written word. It only afflicts a person whose inner life has lost its balance. Therefore, our primary duty is to guard and cultivate the spirit. It is the sovereign of our existence. From it flow our thoughts, our words, our expressions, and the very posture with which we move through the world. If the spirit is robust, healthy, and focused, our style will naturally be forceful, clear, and vigorous. But if the spirit begins to falter and collapse, the entire architecture of our personality, including the words we choose to speak, will come crashing down in ruins alongside it. Let us seize twice on darkness as a veil for wickedness. The daylight has begun to draw in, shrinking the hours of the sun, yet there remains a generous portion of day for the man who's willing to rise alongside it. How commendable is the person who anticipates the dawn, standing ready to greet the very first rays of light, and how disgraceful is the one who lies buried in his bed while the sun climbs high into the sky, beginning his waking life when half the world's labor is already done. There is a strange and unnatural sickness that has taken hold of certain elements of society, a deliberate inversion of day and night. There are those who refuse to lift their heavy eyelids until the sun is setting, turning the natural order of the cosmos completely upside down. This behavior is not born of necessity, but of a deeply rooted disdain for a normal, wholesome existence. These individuals are desperate to separate themselves from the common crowd in every possible way. just as they seek to distinguish themselves through the bizarre extravagance of their clothing, the ostentatious nature of their dinner parties, and the flashy elegance of their carriages, they feel compelled to alter the very fabric of time to suit their vanity. For a man who equates infamy with success, the ordinary vices are simply not enough. He must live a life that is entirely backward to ensure he is noticed. Such people are at war with nature, and a life lived against the grain of the universe is a life of perpetual, exhausting friction. Their days are shrouded in artificial gloom, and their nights are ablaze with unnatural light, matching the internal chaos of their own souls. We, on the other hand, must remain steadfast on the path that nature has so clearly illuminated for us. When we align our habits with the natural rhythms of the world, existence becomes a fluid and harmonious journey. To fight against the established order of nature is to doom oneself to the futile, agonizing struggle of rowing endlessly against a powerful current. Letter 16. On the conflict between pleasure and duty. I have at last arrived at my country retreat at Alba. I reached the house late into the night, thoroughly worn down by a journey that was not so much lengthy as it was profoundly uncomfortable, only to find that absolutely nothing was prepared for my arrival. I was the only thing ready to be there. So, I took myself to bed to shake off the fatigue, using the delay of the cook and the baker as an opportunity to hold a quiet conversation with myself. I reflected on the truth that no situation is genuinely burdensome if we accept it with a light heart, and that a minor inconvenience only swells into a crisis if we allow ourselves to become agitated by it. My baker may not have a fresh loaf ready, but surely the estate manager, the steward, or one of the tenants will have some crust to spare. A voice within might complain that such bread will be coarse and unpalatable. If that is the case, the remedy is incredibly simple. One only has to wait. Hunger is the finest of all cooks, and given enough time it will transform the hardest, grimiest crust into the softest, most delicious wheat. The rule, therefore, is that we should never eat until the demand of hunger is real and sharp. I am perfectly content to delay my meal until either the good bread arrives or my fastidiousness regarding the bad bread vanishes entirely. It is absolutely vital that we condition ourselves to be satisfied with little. Even those who are blessed with immense wealth and surrounded by every conceivable luxury will inevitably encounter moments when the machinery of their comfort breaks down. No fortune can shield a man entirely from the sudden deprivations that chance throws in his path. By voluntarily embracing small hardships and learning to smile at delays and meager rations, we construct an inner fortress that fortune cannot breach. We teach ourselves that our peace of mind is not tethered to the efficiency of a kitchen or the promptness of a servant, but rests securely within our own sovereign will.